Ago, Soviet troops crossed into Afghanistan, starting an almost decade-long war with heavy military and civilian casualties. Afghanistan is today still ravaged by war after the US-led invasion in 2001. RT's Paula Sleer looks at the lessons that could have been learned from the Soviet occupation.
30 years ago, it would have been unthinkable for these Mujaheddin to talk with Russian television. The only Russians they faced were down the barrel of a gun. But now, on the same day Soviet soldiers crossed their borders, they're ready to talk with an old enemy about a new one.
Every country changes and times change. The Soviets came because they wanted to change the culture of Islamic Afghanistan to communism. Today the situation is the same, except that NATO armies have replaced the Soviets. Their troops are here because of Iran, China and Russia. They want to change our culture, but we will never abandon Islam.
It's a lesson the Soviets learned the hard way. Haji Abdul Rashid Dara was in his village the day news spread that more than 5,000 Soviet troops had been airlifted into the country. He and nearly half his neighbors immediately signed up to fight them.
We started with very simple equipment, old guns that we'd been using on animals. But weapons and guns are not important. We had our trust in Allah. The Soviet soldiers were very powerful and brave, but we always knew we'd win because Allah was with us.
Also with them was the financial and military support of the United States, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia to counter what they perceived as a growing Soviet threat. This support meant that in the next 9 years, a bloody conflict would leave more than 1 million Afghans and some 15,000 Soviet soldiers dead. For many Afghans today, the Soviet legacy is complicated. On the one hand, war and invasion, but on the other, assistance and aid that the USSR had been giving to the country since the 1950s. The Soviets left their mark in Afghanistan also through the many structures they built. Hospitals, universities, government ministries and residential buildings like this one were all erected in the 1980s. Roshan Siran's father and brother were soldiers in the Afghan army. They were trained by Soviets and rewarded with this apartment built by Soviet engineers. When the Taliban came to power, Roshan lost her job as a teacher and turned the family home into a school for girls in defiance of their regime.
The Soviets were not like NATO and the American troops. They didn't want to be in towns. They preferred working with the Afghan military in the provinces. When Soviet troops saw Afghan women, they turned their faces away, which we appreciated. They gave the children sweets. People were better off then than now. We'd receive free food.
But still, says Habibullah Rafi, a leading Afghan writer, no country has the right to invade another. He's convinced NATO and the United States will soon learn this lesson.
We Afghan people hate those foreigners who come to our country for their own purposes, to attack and control. America is making the same mistakes the Soviets made. They go to the villages, they bomb, innocent people die. They've promised to help Afghanistan, but they haven't done anything. Murder is murder.
From next year, when President Barack Obama's reinforcements arrive, NATO will have more troops in Afghanistan than the Soviets did. And by 2011, they will have been in the country for longer. Just what their legacy will be remains to be seen. But for now, it seems the longer they remain, the more resentment and anger they build. Paula Sleer, RT, Kabul.